Hey everybody, welcome back to Race of History. Today we're getting into the next Napoleon video, Aspern. Let's get into it.
An Epic History TV History March collaboration, supported by our sponsor, Osprey Publishing. In 1809, France, under Napoleon Bonaparte, was the most powerful nation in Europe. But the French Emperor's invasion of Spain and Portugal the previous year had failed to deliver the easy victory he'd expected. And with many of Napoleon's best troops and commanders now tied down in Spain, an old enemy prepared to challenge France once more. Austria had been preparing for war with France since her last humiliating defeat at Austerlitz in 1805. Now, with Napoleon busy in Spain and a British promise of cash subsidies, plus a supporting attack in northern Europe, it looked like the ideal time to strike. This time, Austria's armies would be led by Archduke Charles, Emperor Francis's younger brother. At 37, he was 2 years younger than Napoleon, but already had 15 years' experience of high command. And he was learning from past defeats. He'd begun to reform the Austrian army along French lines, copying Napoleon's corps system and introducing new infantry tactics. In the Napoleonic Wars, infantry fought in close order, packed together, standing shoulder to shoulder. But why present such an easy target for the enemy? First, command and control. Before radios, orders had to be relayed by shouted commands, drums or bugles. Difficult enough in the smoke and din of battle. Almost impossible if troops were scattered. Second, firepower. Smoothbore muskets were inaccurate beyond about 80 yards, so volley fire, firing en masse, was the best way to inflict physical and psychological damage on the enemy. Third, morale. Soldiers were much more willing to advance into danger or hold the line if they did so together as a unit, urging each other on. Fourth, defense against cavalry. Scattered infantry were easy targets for horsemen. Only by sticking together could they fight them off. The basic tactical unit of infantry was the battalion. A French line battalion had, in theory, 840 men, but in practice, nearer 500 to 600. Our example here has 605 men, a typical strength for a battalion on campaign. The men were divided into 6 companies, 4 fusilier companies, and 2 flank companies. On the right, the grenadiers, made up of the tallest, strongest men, often detached to form elite all-grenadier units. And on the left, the voltigeurs, specialist light infantry, used for skirmishing in front of the battalion. Skirmishers moved independently, used cover, and fired at will to harass and unsettle the enemy, while preventing...
Yeah, so this is the same basic idea of ancient warfare skirmishers. The difference here being, obviously, they're not, throwing spears, shooting arrows, something of that sort. They actually have guns, but they're quick-moving units. They're used to slow down the oncoming enemy troop movement in one direction or another, whether that group is trying to retreat or advance or whatever. And we saw that with one of the battles. I don't remember off the top of my head which one it was, where France had almost no troops at the actual battle. They fought kind of this facade with their skirmishers where they were able to hold off a major attack and kind of disguise how many troops they had there. That's really what the skirmishers are used for. That's how they're used. And if you have a good skirmishing group, or if you have a commander on the ground that knows how to use them, even though they're not really overwhelming in any way as far as their firepower or manpower or anything like that, if you have a commander that knows how to use them, they can be extremely, extremely advantageous on the ground.
Preventing enemy skirmishers carrying out the same task. Most armies also had specialist light infantry units for this role, such as the British 95th Rifles, French Chasseurs à Pied, and Austrian and Prussian Jaeger battalions. The traditional battlefield formation was the line, all companies formed up alongside each other, 3 ranks deep. Line formation maximised the number of men who could fire their muskets at the enemy, and limited casualties from artillery fire. But it was extremely vulnerable to cavalry if it could be outflanked. And even for well-drilled troops, it was difficult to keep the line straight while advancing across broken ground. So for manoeuvre and attack, battalions usually formed a column of divisions. This was a more flexible formation that allowed the battalion to advance quickly, though it presented a larger target to enemy guns, firing solid round shot that would tear through several ranks.
This seems similar to what the Romans did. So the difference here being lines are essentially the groups of troops that you have facing off against the enemy in one broad line. Ranks is how many rows of troops are in that given line. One of the things that made the Romans so different and unique in ancient battle is they had multiple lines. That was not very common at that time. The difference here, you still have all the advantages of having multiple lines, in that you can move extremely quickly. You're very flexible on the go during the battle. You have troops that are normally in reserve. So you have a line that's way back at the back that's a reserve unit. So if you start having a group get bogged down here or there, you can move new, fresh troops into that area. So that's advantageous. The major difference here is the firepower. The Romans were not worried about somebody throwing a spear through 3 lines of their infantry, right? That was not something that their legions were not fearful of somebody shooting an arrow through all of their lines. With the new firepower, with the cannons, that is definitely a danger. That if you have these different lines, it can go right through them. It'll blow right through the first one, get right to the second one, and even to the third one. So that's something that you kind of have to keep in mind whenever you're continuously having lines that are right in row with each other.
And far fewer men could fire their muskets at the enemy. Theoretically, therefore, the battalion would deploy into line before reaching the enemy. But carrying out this slow manoeuvre under fire wasn't always possible or sensible. So some commanders kept their men in column, relying on momentum to break the enemy line. This was a risky tactic that often worked against raw troops, but led to high casualties when facing better trained infantry, like British redcoats. A column could be closed up quickly to provide protection from cavalry, or if there was time, could form a square. With bayonets fixed, the battalion formed an all-round defence that often resembled more of a rectangle. Enemy cavalry could surround the battalion, but not break in, as horses won't charge a solid wall of men and steel. But an infantry square was extremely vulnerable to artillery fire.
Yeah.
And could only move very slowly. Changing quickly and smoothly from one formation to another, especially under fire, required training, practice, and experience. In 1809, the Austrian army began to use the battalion mass formation, crude but more suited to hastily trained conscripts. This was a dense column with limited firepower and huge vulnerability to enemy cannon. But it could quickly close up to repel cavalry using the same principle as the square, but without the complex drill, and was much more manoeuvrable. Napoleon, warned by his spies that Austria was preparing for war, left Spain and raced back to Paris, arriving on the 24th of January 1809.
You know that when Napoleon gets word of this and starts heading back to Paris, he is losing his mind. He has beaten Austria over and over and over again. He has let them off the hook. He has not really taken nearly as much territory as he could. He has basically tried to placate them into becoming part of this new Europe. You know that when he hears again that they're about to attack, he is losing his mind, getting back to Paris as fast as he can, going, I am going to put my foot up their ass when I get back there. You know he is pissed.
The French army in Germany, commanded by Marshal Berthier, would need urgent reinforcement. So Napoleon summoned units from Spain, called up young conscripts, and soldiers from his German allies in the Confederation of the Rhine. La Grande Armée was no longer the finely honed instrument of 1805, but with Napoleon at its head, it was still a formidable force. Archduke Charles ordered diversionary attacks in Poland and northern Italy, but launched his main attack against France's ally, Bavaria, on the 10th of April. It came a week earlier than Napoleon had expected and caught the French Emperor by surprise. Charles was relying on a rapid advance, but a last-minute change of plans, torrential rain, and a slow-moving baggage train slowed progress to a crawl.
That's the big difference here, right? Napoleon is able to be so fast because he has the corps. They can take different routes. They can live off the land. They don't have to wait for these baggage trains in the way that conventional armies do. So he's able to move extremely fast through all of these different battles across Europe. You see now why conventional armies have the issue doing that. Even if you want to use speed, even if you want to use the element of surprise, you have to be able to maintain that standing army. And if it gets too far ahead of its supply lines, you basically can't sustain it. It'll break. And so these are the issues that you run into.
Marshal Berthier was a brilliant chief of staff to Napoleon, but an indecisive field commander. His forces were too widely dispersed, and Marshal Davout's Third Corps was dangerously isolated at Regensburg. Charles ordered his corps to converge and destroy it.
Yeah, geez.
But on the 17th of April, Napoleon arrived at Donauwörth to take over command. He immediately ordered Davout to withdraw from his exposed position. It was too late for him to escape without a fight. Davout's Third Corps was one of the best in the Grande Armée, and in a fast-moving battle across wooded hills, the heroes of Auerstadt threw back the Austrians. Despite the heroism of General Major Liechtenstein, badly wounded, leading his troops forward, Third Corps escaped the encirclement. The Battle of Toygenhausen was the start of Napoleon's so-called four-day campaign. First, he used Marshal Lefebvre's Bavarian 7th Corps and a provisional corps under Marshal Lannes to drive a wedge into the Austrian army. Then he pursued its left wing towards Landshut, believing he was following the main Austrian army. French troops and their German allies stormed the town's bridge to win a hard-fought victory. But Napoleon realized that Archduke Charles was not at Landshut, and that, once again, he'd left Marshal Davout to face the main enemy force. Sending Marshal Bessières in pursuit of the Austrian left wing, Napoleon swung north, falling on the Austrian 4th Corps at Eckmühl. The French and their German allies won their 4th victory in as many days. But Charles's main force was still intact, and hoping to keep it so, he ordered a rapid retreat across the Danube. The French pursued, storming the walled city of Regensburg, which they knew as Ratisbon, with its vital stone bridge. Napoleon put Marshal Lannes in charge of the assault. When the attack faltered, Lannes threatened to lead the next charge in person, and his men, suitably chastised, took the city. During the siege, Napoleon was hit in the foot by a spent bullet, causing widespread alarm, but it proved to be a superficial wound. Stubborn Austrian resistance had allowed Archduke Charles and his army to escape across the Danube. Napoleon had cut the Austrian army in half, but both sections now retreated in good order towards Vienna. Napoleon led his forces in pursuit, detaching Lefebvre's Bavarian Corps to deal with a popular revolt in Tyrol, and 3rd Corps and the Württemberg 8th Corps to guard his line of communications. Charles chose not to defend the capital, which surrendered on the 13th of May after a short bombardment. Instead, Charles and the Austrian army lay in wait across the Danube. Napoleon was now down to 80,000 men, facing 110,000 Austrians. Charles's army had fought bravely and well throughout the campaign, but Napoleon still had a low opinion of Austrian troops and decided to attack.
Everything is different about this situation, right? Napoleon normally has more men, he's normally way faster, he's able to overwhelm the defenses of whoever he's fighting. He has the better trained troops, he normally has every advantage from himself as the commander all the way down the list, right? In this scenario, he's facing, probably for the first time since they fought the small British force, he's facing a at least somewhat trained military force. I mean, this has just been thrown together armies, basically, in a lot of these cases. But he's facing a better trained military force. They have more men than he does. They were already able to retreat without getting totally overwhelmed, which is something they have not done very well throughout the war. And so everything about this screams that this is something different.
On the night of the 20th of May, French engineers hastily built a series of floating bridges between the river islands of the Danube, and French troops began to cross.
Are they about to do exactly what was done in the whatever conflict that was? I forget which one it was. We did it over the last day or two, where the force attacking the small French corps basically blocked itself in because it had a river right to its back. Is he about to do the exact same thing? Surely not, right? Surely not.
By noon the next day, Napoleon had most of Massena's 4th Corps and his cavalry across the river, about 24,000 men and 40 guns, holding the villages of Aspern and Essling. Napoleon expected the Austrians to retreat once more, and that he'd only face a rear guard. But reports soon arrived that the entire Austrian army was advancing against him in 5 attack columns, 90,000 men and 300 cannon. The situation got even worse. The Austrians began to float heavy barges and obstacles downriver to smash through the flimsy French bridge. Each time, Napoleon's only supply route was cut off for several hours, causing critical delays to the arrival of reinforcements and ammunition. The battle began around 2:45 p.m. as infantry of the Austrian First Column attacked Aspern. The village was soon under attack from 3 sides. General Molitor's French garrison clung on desperately, fighting hand-to-hand in the streets and suffering 50% casualties. To support the defenders of Aspern, Napoleon ordered cavalry to charge the Austrian Third Column. But they could not break through the Austrian infantry, closed up in their battalion mass formation. At 6 p.m, Archduke Charles ordered General Bellegarde's second column to take Aspern at any cost. Charles himself rode among the front ranks, urging the men forward. In ferocious fighting, the Austrians took the village. Napoleon immediately sent in newly arrived reinforcements to recapture it. About the same time, the Austrian 4th Column began its attack on the village of Essling, where Marshal Lannes had taken charge of defences while he waited for his own corps to cross the Danube. The first Austrian assault was repulsed. The veteran French cavalry commander General d'Espagne led his cuirassiers in pursuit, but was hit by grape shot and died of his wounds. Around 9 p.m, the Austrian 5th Column finally arrived in position and made its first attack against Essling, which was thrown back by Lannes' troops. As night fell, firing died out across the battlefield, and men got what rest they could among the dead and the wounded. Overnight, 2nd Corps and the Imperial Guard crossed the Danube to reinforce Napoleon's army, which now numbered 71,000 and 150 guns. But
see, my thought process is the exact same here as it was with the other one. The end of the day, like, you're lucky that you didn't get overrun, you held off when you could, you're getting the bridges put back together as fast as you can. You are not in a good position. You, like, just get out of there. Just get out of there. There's no reason for you to fight this battle where you are literally screwed if you lose. My opinion was the same thing on the other side. It's like, if you win, great, you win. But if you lose everything. Everything. You are literally trapped here. So the army is gone if you lose. Jeez.
But then the bridge broke again, leaving Davout's 3rd Corps still waiting to cross. Nevertheless, Napoleon decided to attack, using 2nd Corps to break the Austrian centre. But first, Aspern would have to be retaken. Heavy fighting broke out in the village before dawn. By 7 a.m, it was back in French hands. At Essling, fresh Austrian attacks were fought off by General Lassalle's cavalry and units of the Young Guard. With both flanks secure, Napoleon launched his main attack in the centre with Lannes' 2nd Corps. Austrian guns poured fire into the advancing French ranks. General Saint-Hilaire, leading the attack, a hero of Austerlitz and Jena, had his foot blown off, a wound that proved fatal. Archduke Charles sent his Grenadier Reserve forward to strengthen the line. The French infantry, under torrential fire, began to fall back. At this critical moment, the French bridge over the Danube was broken again, halting the vital flow of reinforcements and ammunition to Napoleon's army. By 2 p.m, the French had been driven out of Aspern once more. Heavy fighting continued in Essling, which was briefly captured by the Austrians, then retaken by the Young Guard. Napoleon knew his army could do no more. At 4 p.m, he ordered his exhausted cavalry to make a last charge to keep the enemy at bay, then gave the order to retreat. Archduke Charles, whose own army had suffered huge losses and was low on ammunition, was content to watch the French withdraw to the island of Lobau. In the final moments of the battle, Marshal Lannes, one of Napoleon's finest commanders and closest friends, was hit by a cannonball that smashed both his legs. He died of his wounds a week later. It was a deep blow to the Emperor. The two-day Battle of Aspern-Essling was Napoleon's first major defeat, caused by his overconfidence and hasty planning.
That's becoming a theme here. You know, with the Spain and Portugal stuff, now with this one, the theme is starting to become Napoleon being kind of overconfident, overzealous. I mean, he could have very easily lost his whole army there. Very easily. But this is something that just continues to kind of perpetuate itself, that Napoleon is thinking a little too highly of he and what his army can do. This is not the same grand army that you know, has fought in most of this war. It is a totally different force. It has totally different people in it in a lot of cases. It's just a different thing. And Napoleon is slow kind of catching up to the shifting winds here.
Both sides suffered heavy losses, and Napoleon avoided a much greater disaster only because of the exhaustion of the Austrian army. The French Emperor had learned new respect for the Austrians. Under Archduke Charles, they had fought bravely, with greater confidence, organisation and leadership. Within days of his defeat, Napoleon had summoned reinforcements to join him on the Danube, and begun planning his revenge. If you'd like to learn more about Napoleon's major battles or campaigns...
Golly, he had him trapped there. He had him completely trapped. They're doing a forced retreat. You've already pushed back the cavalry once. I know everybody's exhausted, and that's kind of hard to quantify when you're looking at maps and pushes and stuff like that. But golly, you've got him trapped, and you let him go. That's wild. Anyway, that was the Napoleon video, Aspern. Like, comment, subscribe. I'll get to the next Napoleon video tomorrow, and I'll see you guys then.